Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis. This movie stars Adam Driver, Giancarlo Esposito, Nathalie, Emmanuel, Aubrey Plaza, Shia, LaBeouf, Jon Voight, Laurence Fishburne, and so many other people in this film. A very, very interesting cast of people that have been assembled by Francis Ford Coppola. One of the, I guess, biggest names in filmmaking ever since the 70s with all of his, big hits like The Godfather, Apocalypse Now, and he's finally back in the year 2024 with a movie that he's apparently been working on for decades. This movie did premiere at the Cannes Film Festival to extremely mixed reviews. Honestly, the reviews coming out of the Cannes Film Festival is the reason why I was extremely excited to watch this film, because some people were comparing it to Tommy Wiseau's The Room, which if you've seen The Room and if you've seen this movie, honestly, I think it's pretty fair to be able to see how people made that connection. But then other people have been saying that it is already going to be a misunderstood gem, comparing it to even Francis Ford Coppola himself, comparing it to the reaction out of Apocalypse Now, with people being very divided at the time when that film came out, to eventually, that film getting as highly praised as it is today. It is a film that is going to spark a lot of conversation, a film that's going to spark a lot of divisiveness amongst, either Coppola stans who are either going to praise this film as a masterpiece, or other people that are going to be tired of Francis Ford Coppola's ego that is on display on screen, and how much can you handle seeing so much of this artist just kind of throwing everything at the screen and seeing what sticks. It all kind of varies on your interpretation of the film and how much you can handle as an audience member watching this movie. And I found it to be an extremely interesting watch, even though I don't quite know if I like the movie even after watching it twice. And so of course I will be talking about spoilers for Megalopolis, so if you have not had a chance to see this movie just yet and you're interested in it because it is Francis Ford Coppola, or because of the conversation around the film, or anything that you've heard around it and you're interested in seeing this movie, the trailer intrigued you, go watch it. I will say, if you're somebody in the more general audience, I don't think this movie is going to play well for you whatsoever, but I do want to get into all the little details in this film because, again, at least for me as an audience member, I find a lot of it to be extremely interesting. And I think the best way to start off is by just reading off the premise off of Wikipedia, because I think it presents the storyline in a way that is kind of what the movie is, but doesn't show the entire picture. In a decaying metropolis called New Rome, idealist architect CESAR Catalina is granted a license by the federal government to demolish and rebuild the city as a sustainable utopia using megalon, a material that can give him the power to control space and time. His nemesis, Mayor Franklin CICERO, remains committed to a regressive status quo. Torn between them is Franklin's socialite's daughter and Caesar's love interest, Julia, who, tired of the influence she inherited, searches for her life's meaning. And yes, sure, the movie is kind of about this, but it is also filled with a lot of other subplots and different characters that kind of populate this film to kind of give it that scattershot feeling that I got going out of the movie. But let's focus on those three characters, because that is, I guess, the main storyline of this film. Adam Driver plays CESAR Catalina in this film, who has that, idealistic vision of the future that is put into question because of his past and the death of his first wife. And it is the DA at the time, Franklin CICERO, who put the charges on him, that was trying to get him put in jail because of the mysterious circumstances around the death of this character. And it is revealed later on that he did not kill his wife, that he very much did love his wife, as Julia's character was kind of following him around and investigating exactly what he has behind his eyes, because as he presents himself to the world, he is a playboy. He's going to all the parties in the world, he's doing all these drugs, he is, tripping out on all these very trippy sequences in the entire Coliseum sequence in this movie. But in reality, he does have a more tender side to him. He does have a love for his wife who did pass away, and he has a guilt because he thinks that he drove her to a possible suicide. And because of this, Cicero's character is extremely concerned when his daughter Julia starts becoming involved with Caesar. And I think one of the most important sequences of the movie was at the beginning, which is the confrontation between Julia and Caesar as she goes up there to essentially speak her mind, because Caesar kind of, ran her father's name into the mud in a sequence previous, and so she's going there to speak her mind, and she lets out that she witnessed Caesar stop time at a moment where he's demolishing one of the buildings in the city. And this makes Adam Driver think that she can possibly see the future, or have a vision of the future that he also has, because she was able to see when time was stopped. And I think this makes a connection between these two characters and their artistic abilities to see the future align themselves in a way that he was very much not expecting. And I think it's a really great sequence to also kind of explain what the megalon material is. She's walking through this makeshift model of the city using a bunch of just everyday items that creates something that doesn't really look like anything at face value, but as she walks through it with her eyes closed, she sees that this material can essentially transform itself into anything that he wants it to be, to create these vast and just interesting looking cities of the future that everybody will be able to essentially shape their own buildings and shape their own areas to be able to suit themselves, that they have a kid, they can add another room, because this material can kind of shift and be whatever they want it to be. And the Megalon material is kind of like one of those cheap MacGuffins in a lot of movies where it can kind of just do whatever they want it to do depending on what the script needs it to do. And it causes a lot of things where, yeah, sure, it can build these architects, it can build these moving sidewalks, but it could also heal Adam Driver's character when he's literally shot in the face at one point in this movie in an assassination attempt. And so it really is a magical material that can kind of do anything, but that's not really the point of the whole artistic vision that he has. The point is that he has a vision for the future that is forward looking, whereas CICERO has a vision that is more keep things how they are because things are working, and in order to go into the future you have to kind of destroy what we already have, and he doesn't want to lose his power. And I think that is the main focus of this film, is showing these two, I guess, political leaders, one that has a vision for the future and one that is stuck in the past, eventually coming to terms with each other because of a bridging, I guess, love between his daughter and him, bridging a gap between these two people who were enemies now becoming people who can work together in some sort of way. And that is the, I guess, main focus of this storyline of the film, but that's not the only focus storyline in this film. We also have Aubrey Plaza's character, who is Wild Platinum, which awesome name for a character, by the way. She is somebody who really wants power. She was romantically involved with Caesar's character early on in this film, but there was no real love there until, Caesar meets Julia. That is when he actually falls in love once again, but everything going on between him and Platinum just never really meant anything, and she wants to be part of a power couple. She wants power in any way that she can get it, and so because she is, I guess, rejected by Caesar's character, she goes over to Jon Voight's character to be able to marry him to get into the banking industry, that with all the money that he has to be able to even shut down the businesses of Caesar's character, or maybe even say that I can steal this money, I can steal this banking industry from this character and give it all to you, Caesar, because again, she is all here for the power, for whatever the future holds for her. She wants to be on top in any way that she can get. Either she's stabbing people in the back because of it, or she's selling herself to other people to get to that. And then you have Jon Voight's grandson, played by Shia LaBeouf's character, who is completely off the rails in this movie, playing this weird playboy character who may or may not be sleeping with his sisters, which, yeah, that's another weird and bizarre subplot in this film. But you have this character who is also just kind of a very influenced person who also wants power, who thinks he's smarter than he actually is, and at one point is essentially manipulated by the Wild Platinum character to try to gain some political influence and to be able to, take advantage of the poor people, the immigrants, and the other people in this world that, don't really have a say, to be the characters who are getting, screwed over by Caesar's character, who is literally destroying their homes and leaving them homeless in order to build his better future. And so he's going to these victims of Caesar and getting them to join him politically so he can get up and gain power, and to be able to also do the hostile takeover of the banking industry from his grandfather. And you have all these things with those two characters aligning themselves to take out the Jon Voight character before Jon Voight is able to literally shoot them and kill Wild Platinum in a very hilarious scene. And they have Shia LaBeouf's character literally be strung up by his own constituents and literally throw their red hats at him because he lied to them and did bad stuff. And so that storyline ends very abruptly, but then it also kind of shows that, yes, now even the Jon Voight character is on the side of Caesar and of CICERO, and everybody can now go on into the future and have a good discussion without the influence of the people, the liars and the cheaters in the world. The movie itself feels very scattered in its ideas, and all these characters having these different storylines. And I get the point that Francis Ford Coppola was trying to portray in this film, mainly because of the Q&A that he had in one of these screenings. The first time I did watch this film was at the live Q&A with the live theater interactive element of the film, which I will talk about in a second here. But in the actual Q&A, it had Francis Ford Coppola, Robert De Niro, and Spike Lee for some reason, and they all were talking about how they first met at first in the interview, which was very, very long and drawn out and just didn't really have anything to do with the movie, because again, they're doing a Q&A before the actual screening for the movie, so they can't really talk about the movie itself until things turn very political, when Francis Ford Coppola says something to the extent of, in a few months we're going to be under the leadership of our own emperor and the US empire will collapse, and essentially saying that if Trump wins the election, we're going to be in a situation like this. And it was a statement that got a lot of boos from the audience, because it was essentially saying that Trump will win and that we will lose, essentially. And then Robert De Niro goes on a tangent after that, saying that no, we need to vote, we need to go out there and defeat Trump because he will destroy America. And it got extremely political, and it got much more interesting at that point, even to a point where Spike Lee made a hilarious joke about the cats and dogs and Haitians thing in Ohio, which absolutely killed me, I love Spike Lee so much. But the main thing that I got out of this interview before the movie was the fact that this was all just a ploy to essentially explain the movie before we actually watch the movie, because I think even the people distributing this movie, and even Coppola himself, I think believes that it's hard to pitch this movie because it doesn't really portray its ideas in a way that will satisfy and that people will understand after first watch. And yes, the main theme of it is to have that conversation about the future. There's a line that Caesar Catalina has at the end of the film when he's on stage that we all need to have a serious debate about our future, and until we have that, we can never have a utopia. That is the theme of the movie, and that was literally told to me by Francis Ford Coppola before the movie started in his interview. And so that's all to say that yes, this movie is incredibly politically motivated from the very beginning to the very ending of the film, with the core message that if we're able to actually discuss and work together, then we can move forward into the future. And I like the ideas of those themes, but is it able to actually convey those themes properly? I think by the end of it, the hopeful message of the future does come across. I think that one thing that was striking to me between Francis Ford Coppola's interview and the actual film itself is that he surprisingly has a very optimistic view of the future, even though, you know, he's at an age where you would expect him to be a little bit more bitter and a little bit more, I guess, pessimistic about our future. But no, he's extremely optimistic. But when you go through the actual film and through some of these sequences that, you know, feel very much like a metaphor for certain things in our politics, I think that those ideas that are being explored there don't fully come across as I think how he intended. And so, for example, you have the entire Colosseum sequence, which was at times one of my favorite sequences in the movie because I think it is beautifully shot. It is the production design of it is very interesting. The costumes and the Roman aesthetic of all this was really interesting to see, even though the outside of it looked like a normal New York street. Then you go inside and it looks completely different. It looks like, you know, the old-time Roman Empire. Essentially, you have a full chariot chase happening in the middle of this Colosseum, and then all of a sudden it turns into a wrestling match, and then like some circus acrobatics and stuff like that, which it's just, there's a lot of weird conflicting and clashing ideas of like old school things with futuristic things and modern day things that I do think is a little bit, just makes the film feel like that scattershot feeling that I got out of the film. But the core of this was that there's a singer played by Grace VanderWaal, who's apparently a virgin that everybody is bidding on to keep her virginity, essentially to keep her as a pure person. I don't really know exactly why that was a thing in the film. I couldn't tell you. If you know, let me know in the comment section down below, or that's kind of weird to comment on. But either way, essentially what happens is the Shia LaBeouf character doctored some footage of Caesar Catalina's character sleeping with this character that's supposed to be a virgin, is also supposed to be a minor, and that's, you know, throws him under the bus, and now he is seen as a predator, essentially. And so everybody freaks out inside this Colosseum, and as Laurence Fishburne said in some of the voiceover before the sequence, was the fall of the Colosseum is a sign for the fall of the entire, you know, Roman Empire to begin with. And so as things go crazy inside of this Colosseum, that is where we start to see the turn of events in this film, turn from the society that we had to it being destroyed into what we see at the ending of the film. And, you know, yeah, sure, it is a giant metaphor for cancel culture and how, you know, if you're able to, you know, talk to this footage and everybody believes it's right off the bat, you're not able to have an actual discussion about discovering what the truth is in a situation, then how are you supposed to move forward with working with these people if not able to have the conversation to get to the bottom of the actual truth of the situation? And, you know, I think that's that idea and that message does come across on screen, but it also misses the point of why cancel culture became a thing in the first place, because the whole point of it was hold people accountable for the bad things that they do, for the crimes that they commit. So, you know, when you have certain people legitimately, you know, doing terrible things and, you know, committing crimes and are convicted for said crimes and be put in jail for those certain things, that is the good thing about calling people out on these sort of things. And if you just kind of portray it as, oh, it wasn't real, that it's all fake and doctored, and that it just kind of like the whole thing of presuming guilt first and then, you know, finding innocence later, yes, that is a problem. But also you can't ignore the fact that, you know, some people need to be put in the spotlight and to shine a light on these terrible things that are happening, and that needs to happen. So I don't think it has a nuanced approach to exploring cancel culture. It's just one sequence that is beautifully shot and has a lot of great, interesting ideas in it, but I don't think it fully gets why it is important in our actual society. Another example of this is Shia LaBeouf's character and his rise into political fame in this movie, and how he's, you know, utilizing the immigrants, the poor people, and the people who are displaced by the destruction of some of these homes and some of these buildings to create space for the new utopia from Caesar Catalina, and how he uses that to gain his political power in this world. And I think all this stuff rubbed me just the wrong way, because I think this is the most direct comparison, or this most direct, I guess, metaphor between, you know, Trump and this character, even to a point where part when this character has his downfall and his grandfather, you know, shoots Aubrey Plaza's character and shoots him in the ass and then strings him up and then, you know, has all the people, all his followers throw the red hats at him. It's very clearly, you know, pointing out that this character is kind of like the Trump of this world, somebody who, you know, thinks he's smarter than everybody else, but is really just manipulating people to follow him or being manipulated himself to become this political figure, to be able to, you know, gain power in any way that he deems that he can get power. But at the same time, you're painting his followers as people who are uneducated, who are immigrants, as people who are easily manipulated. And that is just awful. That completely rubbed me off the wrong way. I hated that explanation of the people that he is able to gain as his followers. I found that to be incredibly disrespectful and completely out of touch into how this entire situation works and how all these people start rioting. And it just felt like this person and Francis Ford Coppola's take on those type of things that happen in our real world is completely out of touch of actual reality. And yes, I do get the whole point of, you know, Caesar Catalina's character being framed for something to be able to, you know, tarnish his name. It's to be able to, you know, perpetuate, you know, the divide between all these people and to keep people, you know, arguing and keep people from, you know, coming together in any sort of way. That makes sense. That does, you know, tie into the main theme of this film of, you know, pushing all those things off on the side and working together. I get that, but I don't think that the film itself has enough nuance to be able to portray that in a way that works for me. Even so, with the whole Shia LaBeouf thing, because that storyline ends so incredibly abruptly with the whole thing with the bow and arrow and it being, you know, Jon Voight's boner and him, you know, having the surprise reveal of it being a bow and arrow and then he shoots Aubrey Plaza. It was completely campy and over the top and funny to me. And I don't know if that was the desired intent from Coppola as a director, because it just ended that storyline off so completely abruptly and didn't feel like it was satisfying payoff to watching Aubrey Plaza's character manipulate all these people this entire time, because she just shot and killed and nobody else is influenced by this death whatsoever. It doesn't change anything going on in the main plot or storyline in the film. It just has no effect besides, I guess, somewhat tying to the main theme of the story. But either way, it just didn't feel like a cohesive way to end that storyline, to go off to the end of the movie, or to make Jon Voight's character even want to join Catalina's character. I guess Catalina's speech at the end of the movie was so revolutionary and so mind-blowing that it got, you know, CICERO's character to be like, oh, I'm going to go stand on stage with him. And it got, you know, this Jon Voight character to go, you know what, I'm going to donate all my money to this guy because he has a vision of the future. I just didn't think that that speech and those ideas and those themes didn't come together to coalesce into, you know, pitching his message of people coming together in a satisfying and just meaningful way. And then you have Shia LaBeouf's performance, which is also all over the place. You have him wearing the dress inside the Coliseum sequence and being all weird in that. You have him, you know, dressing as a cowboy at one sequence where he throws his hat on the ground and tells him, his little follower, to pick up his hat, and then his follower throws down his hat and tells his follower to pick up his hat, and then his follower throws off his hat and tells his other follower to pick up his hat. Like, there's so many just really weird and bizarre moments that took me out of the film, because it's like, what is happening? Like, all these themes and all these ideas are in the film. It is all there. It has a meaning. There is a purpose for all of it in here, but does it fit together cohesively? I just don't think it does. But at the same time, it's Francis Ford Coppola. It's a director that we know has the ability to make great films. That's, you know, making a lot of audience members question, like, am I crazy? Do I just misunderstand this? Is this so ahead of its time that in 10 years we're going to look back at it and praise it for being a masterpiece? I honestly don't know, because there are a lot of moments in this movie that are genuinely stunning and beautiful. The opening sequence of Caesar Catalina stopping time is really visually interesting, even though it's also kind of a ripoff of a scene in Men in Black 3. It's really cool to see, but also the whole stopping time thing has no bearing on the plot whatsoever, besides, I guess, being proof that, you know, Julius sees the future in the way that Caesar sees the future. I just don't really know why that was in the film in the first place, because it doesn't really have any bearing on the actual plot or story of the film itself. But then you have really great trippy sequences, like again in the Coliseum sequence when Adam Driver's character is, you know, drugged out and he's freaking out and there's all these hallucinations that he has, or especially after he's shot in the assassination attempt. There's a really great just like montage of all these interesting visuals that you get to see some in the trailer, and that entire sequence is beautiful. It is stunning to see. But immediately after that, you get Adam Driver, who is just all dazed and confused, screaming, no, 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 all over the place. And at one point, he takes off his bandages that's covering his face, and there's this, you know, Arabic kind of musical tone that goes off at that point, and it made the entire audience laugh because of it, because it just felt so incredibly almost insensitive and just out of the place in this sequence. I don't really know the point of all of that. It just felt really weird. And then you have the baby, which I think the baby is the scene that I rolled my eyes out to the most. And in both audiences that I watched this movie with, it had people turning over to their friends that they're sitting next to, just I can just feel their eyes rolling to the back of their head, because when Caesar, Catalina, and Julia are having a child, they said that the baby's name, if it's a boy, is going to be Francis, and that's obviously I guess a reference to Francis Ford Coppola himself. And they literally say that this baby is the future. We're going to carry this baby into the future, and it's going to be the next generation that is going to have so much influence on the world. This baby is the most important baby that's ever going to be born, and his name is Francis. It's just like, oh, I just can't. And then there's a live interactive point in this movie, which, there are still screenings. You can go seek this out if you do want to. But just saying that in my first screening of this movie, this was the worst part of the movie for me, because I found it to be incredibly jarring. So essentially what happens is when the satellite is crashing down onto the city, which is also another plot point in the movie, where it's kind of like a connection to 9/11 and how you had this tragedy happen, and how do you move forward into the future? How do you build a better future after tragedy strikes? And so this satellite comes down, crashing into New Rome, and kills a lot of people, destroys all the land, but then it gives Caesar Catalina the opportunity to be able to build his better future in those areas that were affected. And so yeah, I get the story point in that. But after those beautiful shots of the shadows being cascaded across the buildings, which again, beautiful imagery, beautiful cinematography from the cinematographer and from Francis Ford Coppola's, vision for this film, but then immediately cuts to black, and in the live interactive elements, the lights came up, and there's an actor standing with a microphone at the front of the stage, and the screen turned back on, and it was like a little square at the bottom middle of the screen with Adam Driver's character, at a press conference, and the guy on stage asks Adam Driver a question, and then he answers the question, and then goes into this really weird montage of his view of the future. And I think I would have been a little bit more game for this if the live interactive element was a little bit more interactive, because this guy literally just asks one question about how we should fear the future, or if we should fear the future, or are there going to be things in the future to fear. I don't really remember exactly what the question was, but there was no back and forth. It was just ask one question, then Adam Driver just awkwardly pauses and like ponders the question, but the timing just felt off. And then as soon as he answers the question, the light goes back down, it goes to the little montage, and that was it. It was just one little line that this actor had. The lights came out in the middle of the auditorium, and it took me completely out of the film. And even when I watched it the second time without the live interactive element, that scene was still a tiny little box at the bottom middle of the screen, and the audio of the reporter off screen was still kind of just off on the side. It was like off on one little speaker in the surround sound, so you could kind of really tell what the guy was saying, but also you couldn't really tell. It honestly was very true to how it sounded when we actually had a live person in the audience or in the auditorium to say the line as well. So I guess he did match it as well as he could have. But again, it just took me right out of the film, because you just did a hard cut to black. You have a tiny little screen now in the middle of the screen, and it's even more jarring because there is nobody on stage to be at eye level with Adam Driver at that point. So there was just really no point in making it a tiny little screen. It just was really, really bizarre. I probably wouldn't recommend you seek out one of the theaters that has a live interactive element unless you really want the full experience as Francis Ford Coppola intended, but I do think that makes the movie worse, honestly. And so yeah, this movie for me is a complete mixed bag. It shows the genius of Francis Ford Coppola at times, but also shows the scattershot ideas that he has, a lack of knowledge, or a lack of, I guess, nuance in exploring some of these more complex ideas like cancel culture, like, the political movements of how people gain in power and how people manipulate people to gain that power. It just lacks all nuance in exploring those ideas to just kind of give off a very basic message of, if we work together, things will be better. And I just found it to be it just kind of fell flat by the end of the film for me. And it did make more sense on second watch, but after second watch, I think it more so confirmed my ideas that this movie is a mess. So those are going to be my thoughts on Megalopolis. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this film as well in the comment section down below. Were you totally on board with it? Honestly, I can really see people walking out of this, having their mind be blown, be like, oh, Francis Ford Coppola is a genius. His way of storytelling is so good and revolutionary, and it's going to change film and cinema forever. It's not the effect that it had on me, but I can see somebody walking out of this film having that effect. I could also see somebody walking out of this film that hated it even more so than I did, and just be like, I tried to watch 15 minutes of it and I walked out because what in the world was I watching? Like, as soon as you get to the Coliseum sequence, honestly, I can see a lot of people walking out at that part. I didn't see anybody in my audiences walk out, but that's also because I live in Los Angeles with people who are very much inclined to be watching the Francis Ford Coppola movie opening night and be very excited for it. And so at least my experience with this movie is very much a mixed bag, and I'm very curious to hear if you had the same experience or if you're on one of the other ends of the spectrum that I am on. But those are just my thoughts. Like I said, comment down below, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I just did a live stream talking about how Aubrey Plaza is in everything. Of course, she was in this movie. She was in My Old Ass, which is another Sundance movie that I really did love. I talked about that in the live stream along with Agatha All Along, A Different Man, and a few other things in the live stream. I also mentioned in that live stream that I'm going to be out next week, so I don't know if I'm going to have a review out for Joker Folie à Deux next week. Even the VHS movie that releases on Shudder next week is also one that I'm extremely excited for, but I don't think I'll be able to have a review out for that one right away, and so just be a little patient on some reviews for this next week. But once we get into the big swing of things in October, I'll have a bunch of reviews for a bunch of horror things and a bunch of just other movies and TV shows that I want to talk about here on the channel. So keep an eye out on the channel. Like I said, comment down below, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and I hope to see you all in my next one.